Hello and welcome to another anime lore and theory video. I'm Shergok, your host, and today we are going to take a closer look at the strongest players of the Great Tomb of Nezarec and what makes them so strong and feared. But before we're going to take a closer look at any of this, let me quickly thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as a thanks to all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. And with that said, let's get to the topic at hand. The Great Tomb of Nezarec is a hoard full of horrors and incredibly powerful creatures that alone can instill fear and terror into the hearts of players, and above all, the inhabitants of the New World. However, all of them are under the command of the 41 players themselves, and these beings are no less dangerous or formidable in combat than the other residents of the Tomb of Nezarec, and for this reason, today, we will be focusing on the strongest among them. But before we begin, I want to emphasize something very important. Even though we are discussing the strongest of the 41 guild members here, which means that there are weaker members of the Great Tomb of Nezarec, it is very important to remember that Ein Soul Gone, that is the guild, was a very PvP-oriented guild, and most of its members were notorious player killers, actively hunting other players and guilds. In fact, Punito Mo, the strategist of the Great Tomb of Nezarec, wrote an entire book exclusively about fighting other players, focusing on PvP tactics and strategies, which served as an internal guide for the guild. Yes, books were written specifically for the 41 players on how to approach PvP. In other words, regardless of their character, every member had at least a solid foundational knowledge and experience, whether first-hand or second-hand, on how to handle these PvP battles, and what to do and what to avoid doing. What does this mean? Well, it means that even if your favorite character isn't mentioned here, it doesn't imply that they were weak or failed in the context of Yggdrasil Online. On the contrary, some characters specialized more on support roles than direct PvP. For example, it was Hirohiro's task to meld the weapons and the armor of opponents, while Bukubuku Shagama managed enemies' aggro, so to ensure that the strongest members of the guild in terms of sheer raw damage output could fight and attack and inflict damage uninterrupted. Meanwhile, other players worked behind the scene, for example as smiths or craftsmen. And for these roles, PvP aspects were secondary, with their focus on being crafting items and pulling aggro and tanking damage rather than fighting actively as an offensive combatant and as being specialized in 1v1 combat. And furthermore, all of these characters were at level 100. And leveling up in Yggdrasil Online was relatively simply, especially when there were other players around like your guild members who could power level you. And intentionally dying to respawn and then lose 5 levels upon respawning was a popular method for players to rework their character builds, because now they could gain the levels anew, but this time choose different perks and stats and so on and so forth. And given the strengths of the enemies in Yggdrasil Online and the significant experience points that they provided, leveling up in Yggdrasil Online was not a problem at all. And with all of that said, now we come to the first of the strongest members, a caster who even Ein Soul Gone himself deemed stronger than him, Tabula Smaragdina, the Squidward of the Great Tomb of Nezarec. Not only was Tabula completely obsessed with arcane lore, mysticism, magic and history, but also made significant contributions to the Great Tomb of Nezarec. He created not only Albedo, the overseer of the Floor Guardians, but also her elder sister Nigredo, and Rubedo, the strongest being in all of Nezarec. And just for context, Rubedo is even stronger than the mightiest guild members. And according to Ein Soul Gone, Tabula Smaragdina himself was more proficient and powerful in terms of being a magic caster than Ein Soul Gone, suggesting that his build likely focused more on magical attacks and destructive spells, or perhaps on entirely different styles of combat. Because Tabula Smaragdina was a so-called brain eater, likely a class inspired by the mind flayers of the same name in Dungeons and Dragons. And it is the same class that Nuinist Painkirl had, the Special Information Officer. and this class allows manipulation of the psyche of its captives. So it's possible that Tabudris Magdina preferred this type of attack. So just as Ein specialized in instant death magic, while also mastering powerful spells like Call Greater Thunder or Reality Slash, Tabudris Magdina may have focused almost entirely on inflicting various status effects on opponents like blindness, avita, deafness, silence, fear, madness, slow, impact, petrification, stop, death sentence, hysteria, rage, jury duty, or speeding ticket. Alternatively, he might have had the ability to temporarily control enemies, enabling him to turn a 2 vs 2 fight into a 3 vs 1, and then at the very end, into a 2v1 fight. Next on, we move on to warrior Takemi Kazushi, and he was a rival of Touch Me, and an incredible powerful warrior, with equally mighty weapons. His Takemi Kazushi Mark 8, for example, a weapon specifically crafted to slay Touch Me, was strong enough to rip apart Shaltir Bloodfallen's armor and the arm inside of it, up to the very elbow and even a bit further. And please keep in mind, we are talking about Shaltir Bloodfallen here, the strongest of the Floor Guardians, and her opponent wasn't even a proper warrior wielding this weapon, but rather a caster in perfect warrior mode. In other words, his weapons alone were immensely powerful. And Takemi Kazushi's samurai build likely focused on combining high damage output with speed and agility, perhaps at the expense of defense, similar to how Cocytus is built. And speaking of high offense at the cost of defense, the player with the highest damage output among the 41 members was not Touch Me or Ulbert Elaine Oddle. Instead it was the next one on the list, Lord Nishikian Rai, the creator of Naber al-Gamma and the very discoverer of the dungeon that later became Nezarec, had the highest damage output in the entirety of the guild. And he was a ninja with a stealth build, designed entirely for maximizing damage output, and his build incorporated every conceivable class, item and special skill that increased stealth or, and most importantly, the critical hit damage, allowing him to stack critical hit bonuses to an absolute limit of the game mechanics. And therefore, with a single critical hit, he could deal enormous damage, potentially scoring an insta-kill at least weaker level 100 characters. And also Nishikian Rai loved sneaking up on enemies and striking from behind. And practicing this was also how he discovered the future site of Nezarec, the dungeon that would later become the Great Tomb. And in other games such as the mech battle game Aberrage, he fought in exactly the same way. He even kicked out the radar of his battle mech to add yet another plasma cannon. So naturally, this came at the cost of his defense and his health stat. Additionally, his weapons, including Amaterasu and Tsukiyomi, the sacred twin daggers that dealt holy damage, and therefore dealt damage to Einsulgon even by being wielded by him, were devastatingly effective against Shaltir. Next one is Ulbert Elaine Oddle, and he could consume 60% of his ample mana reserves with just a single attack. But it was worth it, because this attack, Grand Catastrophe, was a spell only unlocked through the World Disaster class, and this class required defeating its previous owner in battle to steal it. And while Lord Nishikian Rai needed some special conditions, aka critical hit, to put out his full damage potential, Ulbert Elaine Oddle did not deal damage against one single target, but Grand Catastrophe was a devastating area of effect damage. And in terms of raw damage output, if they standing too close together, it could potentially annihilate groups like the 5 overlords in Nezarec's own library, Ashurbanipal, or Cocytus's Frost Virgins, provided they were all caught in the blast. And of course, it used 60% of his mana, so the shot needs to be very, very, very well timed. But even without this very trump card of his, Ulbert had an extremely high damage output and could inflict massive damage with regular 9th and 10th tier spells. And therefore Ulbert was unquestionably the strongest mage in the Great Tomb of Nezarec in terms of sheer damage output, though he was somewhat of a one-trick pony, similar to another mage that likes to use all of her mana to unleash one devastating magical explosion. And they share the same love for eye patches and edgy outfits. Finally, we come to Touch Me, the former leader of Ein Soll Gone back when it was known as Nine's Own Goal, the predecessor organization of the Grey Tomb. And he was the strongest of the 41 regular players of Nazarick. And for all we know, Touch Me was seemingly unmatched by any other player in the Grey Tomb of Nazarick. Neither Ulbert Elaine Oddle, with his massive, Magoman-style magical attack, usable only once before being unable to cast it again because of a mana deficit, nor Lord Nishikian Rai with his extremely high critical damage, nor Ein Soll Gone with his insta-death magic, and the goal of all life is death combined, nor Variatake Mikazushi, despite desperately trying and inventing weapon after weapon in order to defeat him, could actually defeat Touch Me in combat. And there were good reasons for that. Touch Me was one of the strongest players in the old world game Yggdrasil Online, or rather in the worlds of Yggdrasil Online, as Yggdrasil Online consisted of 9 game worlds, each with its very own champion. And Touch Me was one of these champions, meaning he was among the 9 strongest players. And as a world champion, he also unlocked a unique class, just like Ulbert Elaine Oddle did. But in his case, it was the World Champion class. And along with this, he also obtained armor that could only be worn by players with the World Champion class, or by using Perfect Warrior as Ainz did. And I know what you're thinking, this sounds quite overpowered, that a simple Perfect Warrior spell, something that isn't out of the ordinary, could enable a player to wear this extremely rare and powerful World Champion armor. But the issue wasn't that Perfect Warrior is overpowered, but that it was very, very hard to obtain this armor, because A, you needed to be a world champion, or B, even worse, you needed to best a world champion wearing this armor in order to obtain it, so obtaining it was nearly impossible. And fun fact, Nfiria Balia could technically be able to equip this very armor, named Adherence to Order, because his unique ability lets him use any item without any restrictions, no matter which item we are talking about. And as for Touch Me's abilities, he was an extraordinarily powerful fighter, so much so that opponents struggled to land even a single hit on him in melee combat, let alone defeat him. And this is why he named himself Touch Me. It's a challenge to opponents, daring them to try to reach his level and to hit him, to do some harm at the very least. It's a taunt. So in other words, even landing a hit was very, very hard. And this would also explain why Ulbert Elaine's Grand Catastrophe alone wasn't enough to make a difference in their fighting power. Additionally, Touch Me had tremendous offensive capabilities. For instance, he could use the skill World Break, which was both a melee and a ranged attack, stronger than the mana-heavy spell Reality Slash mastered by Ein Soll Gone himself. And given the name World Break, it's likely an exclusive class only for Touch Me, only available to the World Champion class. Oh, and finally one more fun fact, the helmet Touch Me wears isn't a helmet at all, it's his face. His avatar's an insectoid, and what you see is actually his true appearance, unmasked and uncovered. And with that said, now it's your turn. What do you think about the guild, the strongest players among the 41 players of Nazarick, and about this video? Please let me know down in the comment section. And while you type, I also say please check out my German channel, my fantasy channel, and if you don't want to listen to my voice or accent, but are still interested in things I have to say, I have made an AI channel, narrated by almost a woman, where I use AI voiceovers for my videos. And the channels are all linked down in the video description. Also please check out my Patreon if you want to support me beyond just leaving a like or sub. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, thanks to my Patreons for supporting this channel, and as usual, I say my special thanks to Arder Daddy Arder, ASK, Bad Girl Yee, Bad Burrito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon S, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Seer, Crystal Prime, Dead Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Din Pep, Dragonlord Placido Saxophone, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Thiralshivan, Guy with That Hat, Hector Moreno, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Le Louche Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Loverazor, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, O'Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantum, Personage, Ruru, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Cune Caracos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Sir Axolotl, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Zonagon. Thanks, guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you all again soon on my next video.